Hi, everybody. It's Boysen Hodgson. I'm the Communications and Marketing Director for the Mankind Project USA. And I am thrilled, honored to have been invited to sit in on an auspicious occasion here in the Mankind Project USA, bringing together a whole bunch of gentlemen who have been in the study of integral theory for a long period of time. And I'm just going to introduce our panel, and then we'll start out with a first big question. I'm going to start on my top left with Julian Devereaux, who is a just past chairman of the Mankind Project USA, also a past lead for the curriculum development and acquisition circle in the Mankind Project. And to my top right, Kodo, Mike Elser, also a past Mankind Project USA chairman, now deeply involved in the Integral Mondo Zen that's connected to the Mankind Project. Right in the center for me is Kanjo David Carr. David Carr is a full leader trainer, also a past chairman of the Mankind Project. And then to Robert Powell. Robert Powell is also a past chairman of the Mankind Project USA and a full leader trainer. Craig Herink, who is the founder of Mankind Project Kentucky, who is a full leader and a full leader trainer. And also, I just learned today, the gentleman who gifted the name the Mankind Project to this organization. Carmel Surratt is a ritual elder in training. He is the IGC lead in NorCal, and he is also a member of the MKP USA Curriculum Acquisition and Development team. Welcome, Carmel. And finally, to Rich Tosi. Rich Tosi, one of the co-creators of the New Warrior Training Adventure, co-founder of the Mankind Project, and all other credentials that can be piled on to a man who's been here since day one. Welcome, all you guys. And so here we are in a conversation about integral theory. I am thrilled. I have been hearing about this conversation since my early days, and yet it goes way back before that. So the first question I'm going to put to the panel is, so what? Why is this study something that the Mankind Project has taken on in such a formal and informal way over decades? And why don't we start with Rich?
The issue for me is trying to keep this simple. I'll try that. I first ran across this in the early 2000s. It profoundly, a basic understanding profoundly shifted my understanding of what we were doing in the Mankind Project, and it altered the trajectory of what we have become. It's a map that we didn't have before. It seems to be a map that is very valuable.
David, let's go to you next. Why is this important for us now?
For me, it explains a lot of the conflict that we see in our culture around us, that we understand that it's these levels, these belief structures that are conflicting rather than the people. And they kind of ride the people. And I found that very helpful to avoid conflict and have compassion for people with different viewpoints. This is just a really useful map for kind of the calculus of human consciousness, how our consciousness is distributed in these different areas and how they interact and what you know, where I'm going next, or what's the next opportunity for me if I want to choose.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Craig.
I'm going to build on what the guys are saying already. So when I came to this work, all these ideas such as initiation, even emotions and archetypes and all of that were just completely new and expanded my world. And they were not things in ways that I'd formerly been used to talking and thinking about myself and others. And then when I stumbled into the integral model, it opened it up from special effects in a movie. It expanded beyond any of the boundaries. I didn't even know the boxes I was already living in. And so it gave me a whole another way to make sense out of, to navigate, and particularly to guide myself in where I was headed and have a way to calibrate if I'm making progress. It gave me a perspective that I had no way to a place to stand and see things that I hadn't before. Sort of like when I saw that first image of the blue marble, the planet from away, which had never been seen by humankind before. From that point on, my view of the earth was never the same. And once I began to have an integral perspective, it gave me a whole different way to make sense out of the work I was doing, my own personal growth, and as David alluded to, a way not take everything and be in everything so personally. I could go on, but that's been some of the use for me.
Julian, let's go up to you. Thank you for that, Craig.
Yeah, as each man talks, I get another thing to say, but I'll just try to, there's two in this little integral vision book that we were all looking at. There's two questions at the first that really relate to me. How can we make sense of our own life and awareness? From the time I was little, I've tried to make sense of my life, and I've always been kind of a seeker, and through my own recovery and through different experiences in consciousness. Often my experience was to sort of drown in my experience without any way to sort out the data and make any sense out of it. And so then on the next page, it says, what if I had a comprehensive map of myself in the brave new world I find myself in? And after my training, I found myself in this new world in which, my weekend rattled my cage. I mean, all my paradigms started to rattle, and I no longer could hang on to the things that I used to think made sense. And so this whole theory and the idea that we can actually embrace the complexity of our own lives and start making sense out of it. I really appreciate Wilbur's map making, his cartography skills to put all this down, because it's a lifetime work, and it's a gift to all of us that helps me find the way to make sense and meaning out of the chaos of my own life.
Thank you, Julian. And let's move over to Kodo, Mike Elser.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I don't want to repeat, but I heard words like navigate and viewpoint and overview and outlook and all of those things. As new warriors, it's very helpful to know where we are and where we're going to go. And to know where we're going to go is where we want to go, right? Where we're going is where we want to go. My own viewpoint is this is a matter of survival. It's a matter of survival from the organization. It's a matter of personal relevance as well as relevance for the organization. The maps are wonderful. If we want to get I live on the East Coast, if I want to get to LA, I better have a good map. I better know where I'm going. And these provide the maps. And what's more, much of these maps have only been known in the last 80 or 90 or 100 years. Unless we're going to take advantage of everything out there, we won't be relevant as an organization, and my own personal relevance will decrease. I found this absolutely life-changing. It's like taking scales off my eyes. I can now make sense of what's happening in our world. So that's what it means to me.
Carmel, do you want to jump in before I bring us back to Robert?
I'm getting a different perspective already from what's been offered, and I'm anxious to see how this will relate as a tool for newly initiated brothers to map out their own course. So far, I like what I'm hearing, and I'm interested to see where it takes us. So thank you.
So Robert, having heard calculus of consciousness perspective tool, mind-blowing tool, taking the scales off of our eyes, a lot about maps and about awakening. Map making? Map of consciousness? What are we talking about?
I do want to add a little bit about how I got here. 50 years ago, one of my dissertation readers said that he believed people studied philosophy, psychology, and theology in order to avoid suicide. And I've studied all three. And my emphasis in philosophy was in Alfred North Whitehead. He's one of those 100 years ago guys who began laying out the map. And Wilbur acknowledges that and builds on it. And it was a bit of coming home for me. And so I'm comfortable in this structure, but it adds many levels of richness to what I knew already. and very practical, which is one of the things we haven't talked about, except indirectly. You know, our organization, this literally MKP USA is only 8 years old. MKP is maybe 30. Training is 35. And yet it's an artifact of history. It, you know, we live in a world of evolution, and if it doesn't evolve, it'll be a nice footnote to the late 20th century. And in order to evolve, as one of the integral thinkers who I like to listen to a lot, Jeff Saltzman, says, evolution is beautiful, but it's not always pretty. And sometimes it gets messy, and we're in a messy state right now. And we'll talk about later why that might be. But having the map that people have talked about, having a way of, we talk about this on the weekend, on Sunday morning, the directions, you know, they serve to ground us and center us and give us insight into who we are and where we are and how to get to where we want to go. And in one sense, what we're going to be diving into is maps upon maps upon maps. We're going to begin with some of those ones that we all know, we all experience. We may not have thought about it, but I think they'll seem familiar. And then we'll go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And one other thing I'll point out is that for those who know, you know, the organization has reorganized itself in the last year. And we're using a operating system called Holacracy, which we were brought to by a warrior brother from Belgium, Frederick Laloux. And it, Wilbur's thought, it's built on the integral theory. It was considered the first business leadership model to be built on that. So is built on, it's one of the things that is now part of our foundational work. So it's important that for personal growth, for interpersonal growth, for institutional and cultural, to use another map that many of our listeners are probably familiar with from our multicultural and inclusivity work. There'll be a lot of touchstones.
Thank you. One of the things as you were speaking, that there was a lot of personal impact and the awakenings that happened for you as an individual. Something else that I'm interested in, I think some of the other guys who are listening might be interested in, is MKP and integral study, that there's some history in here already. Like, how has integral already been beyond Holacracy, beyond Laloux, beyond the last couple of years? How has integral theory been kind of informing our evolution over a decade or more in MKP?
So it's actually like 2000, going to bring us back to say 2002, which is over 15 years ago. This is before I understood integral. There was a concept called spiral dynamics, which can be fit into the integral framework. It basically talks about levels of development. And at the time, those of you who were around back in the early 2000s, we had these meetings in California, Glen Ivy, where we'd have 60 or 80 guys in a meeting, and the meetings would go on and go on and go on. They were like huge eye groups, and I was literally becoming disgusted, and I didn't know what to do. It was like, I can't handle this. I can't handle it. Something that somehow we had grown into this huge eye group. A friend of mine named Bill Wick called, and he's describing this concept of how we evolve through levels. And he talked about traditional levels, traditional, and then modern, and then postmodern. And the postmodern pluralistic, one of the characteristics of that particular meme, as they're called, was they start off healthy, and one of the unhealthy things that happens is they end up being so sensitive to everybody that they want to make sure everybody's heard. They want to make sure everybody has had their feelings expressed, but nothing happens because you might offend somebody. It was like an explosion happened inside my brain. It's holy crap. That's us. We're in this pluralistic thing, and it described what we were doing to, like, holy shit, somebody understands this. Somebody can describe it, and it got very, very curious. Like, well, okay, well, is there anything beyond that? And we'll get into that. But yeah, there is. There are stages of development beyond that, and it's like, okay, I can stick around here, my God, we have a chance. So that was more than 15 years ago. So that's an example of the early use of general concepts in spiral dynamics.
So I'll just build on that. You had a study group in the mid 2000s that Boysen was a part of. And Boysen was the center director in New England before I became the center director in New England. And I remember a pass-off that we did in Worcester, Massachusetts. And our whole discussion was around spiral dynamics. I said, what the fuck is this? Excuse me. But I will, and that led to a lot of curiosity, a lot of reading. And when I was chair, Robert Powell was chair right behind me, and Julian on the other side. And we would not, I will tell you this right now, and I believe we can get corroboration in this meeting, we would not have survived unification, the whole process of unification, had we not approached it from an integral viewpoint. It was absolutely that critical to be able to see what is actually happening using these maps and have them guide us.
When Kodo called me to invite me to stand for chair, the biggest part of our conversation had to do with whether or not I was familiar with Wilber and integral thinking, because I don't think I would have been, I think I would have been uninvited had I not been able to respond. So,
David, do you have something? Yeah.
The integral map helped us understand that we could bring a lot of the enthusiasm and excitement that we felt about our personal growth from the warrior training to larger areas, to interpersonal and institutional. And there were actually ways to do that, maps to do that. We got very excited about multicultural and did a lot of work on that beginning right at the same time period, but then understood that didn't mean we discarded what came before. But there's a phrase called transcend and include, where we would include what came before and go beyond it to a larger container with new learning, and then continue to do that. That wasn't the end point. There were stages after that. It's interesting to see how people fall in love with one stage and refuse to move. It gave me a framework to understand what we were doing and what was next. I agree. We would not have survived the last 15 years without this framework, without without the understanding and hope that it gave us.
Yeah, Boysen, I want to jump in here because of what I just heard. And the only map that we had up until then was our mission statement, which was created in 1989, which we empower men to missions of service. That was our map, which back in 1989 and through the 90s, it worked pretty good. But beyond that, you know, that's a map, and it guided us and told us what to do. But beyond that, it wasn't very helpful. So we've always had maps. We just needed a more comprehensive, more inclusive map. So thanks.
I think this might be a good moment to bring the new mission statement in that Kodo and Rich brought to the board and the board approved. And there's really a major point there that we never spoke about before. And that mission statement is to create a world where men act on their individual and collective responsibility for the future of humanity by initiating and supporting men on a path of emotional maturity, spiritual awareness, and deepening community. And there's 3 levels. I mean, there's all kinds of things in there. Certainly it's broader than individual mission. It's about a world we're looking at. It's how do we do it? And the piece I was thinking of was the spiritual awareness, which, you know, in 1985, 1990, 2005, I don't think we could have used that language because it just wasn't understood. It would be taken by some to mean, oh, you mean we have to be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, something or other. We have to, you know, what does that mean? Well, as we'll see, integral brings us to a new understanding of spirit and spirituality that is very much in line with what we've been doing for 30 years.
I just want to touch on a point that might get missed, that new mission statement includes the one from 1989. It's not missing. it's expanded and broadened.
And one of the things that is really critical with these maps, if you will, is an understanding that I don't have to make somebody wrong for me to be right. Everybody is right from their viewpoint. Some viewpoints are more inclusive, more loving, more caring. Boy, I didn't get that until I really understood how these things fit together.
In fact, one of the operating principles, if you will, in integral circles is no one is 100% right and no one is 100% wrong. The key metaphor, if you will, has already been mentioned, which is this is a developmental model. And it operates on one of the perennial philosophy, which you'll find in every philosophy, in every religion, as above, so below. That we come into the world with, as we'll see later, certain hardwiring, but every person has to go through a development through various stages, and so do the cultures. So each of these things we're going to talk about carries that model of development from the individual up through everything that exists. In the integral model, Wilber talks of 5 elements, 5 basic things to look at that then give structure to this map. So the 4 we're going to look at today are states of consciousness, stages or levels of development, and we'll use those words somewhat interchangeably for now, lines of development, and then types. So we're going to have to take each of those and explore them and give some definitions and examples and how the hell do they show up in my life.